Smart Dowan had not spoken to another person in 43 days. He counted them carefully, marking each morning on the wooden beam above his bed with a small knife. The marks helped him remember that time was still moving, even if his life was not. The cabin belonged to his grandfather before he died. It sat alone in the mountains of Gangwon province, 3 hours from the nearest town and a lifetime away from Seoul. Dowan had come here to disappear, and he had succeeded. No phone calls, no messages, no reminders of the life he had left behind. He was 32 years old, a veterinarian by training, and completely alone by choice. The night everything changed started like any other. Dowan was sitting on his porch, drinking cheap beer and watching the stars appear one by one. The autumn air was cold enough to see his breath, and he was thinking about whether he had enough firewood to last the week. Then the sky broke open. A line of violet fire cut across the darkness, so bright that Dowan threw his arm over his eyes. The sound came next, a terrible roaring that shook the trees and sent birds screaming into the night. He watched the fire fall behind the eastern ridge, and then the ground jumped beneath his feet as something hit the mountain hard. For a long moment, Dowan did not move. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it in his ears. A meteor, he thought. It had to be a meteor. What else could fall from the sky like that? But meteors did not glow violet. Meteors did not leave trails of light that hung in the air like smoke. He should call someone. He knew this. The police, the military, the news, anyone. But his phone had no signal here, and his radio was broken, and something else was pulling at him. Something that felt like curiosity mixed with fear, mixed with a strange kind of hope. Dowan grabbed his flashlight and his medical bag and started walking toward the crash dot. It took him almost an hour to find the site. The forest was thick, and the darkness made every step dangerous. But he followed the smell of burning wood and the faint purple glow that leaked through the trees ahead. The crater was bigger than his cabin. Trees lay broken and burning around its edges, and at the center sat something that made Dowan's legs stop working. It was a ship. Not a plane, not a satellite, not anything human hands had ever built. The shape was wrong, all curves and organic angles, like something that had grown rather than been made. The surface was black metal that seemed to move slightly, almost like breathing. Blast marks covered its sides, deep wounds that still glowed with heat. Someone had shot this thing down. Dowan stood at the crater's edge for a long time. His mind was trying to understand what his eyes were seeing and failing. Aliens. The word felt stupid and impossible, but there was no other word that fit. Then he saw the blood. It was blue. Bright, glowing blue, like liquid starlight. A trail of it led away from the ship, into the dark trees beyond. Dowan followed. He found her lying against a boulder, 50 meters from the crash. His first thought was that she was beautiful. His second thought was that she was dying. She was tall, much taller than any human woman. Her skin was black like polished stone, but soft light moved beneath it, flowing through her veins in patterns that pulsed and faded. Her face was almost human, but sharper, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Her eyes were closed. Forearms hung limp at her sides, too large and too small. A crown of curved horns swept back from her head, and several of them were cracked and bleeding that bright blue blood. She wore armor that had been torn apart by something violent. Her chest rose and fell in small, painful movements. Each breath sounded wet and wrong. Dowan knelt beside her. His hands were shaking. He was a veterinarian. He had spent his career healing animals, creatures whose bodies were nothing like human bodies. He had learned to work with what he had, to improvise, to find solutions when textbooks offered none. This was just another patient. A very strange patient, but still a patient. He opened his medical bag and got to work. The next several hours passed in a blur of focus and fear. Her blood was not like human blood, but it clotted when he applied pressure. Her bones were not like human bones, but they held when he set them. He cleaned her wounds and wrapped them with his limited supplies. He found what he thought was a piece of metal buried in her side and removed it carefully, watching the blue blood flow and then slow. When he could do nothing more in the forest, he faced an impossible choice. He could leave her here and go for help, but help was hours away and she would die before it arrived. Or he could carry her back to his cabin and hope she survived long enough for him to figure out what to do next. Do-won was not a large man. She was bigger than him and probably heavier. But he lifted her anyway, using all his strength to drape her over his shoulders. And he started the long walk home. He made 3 trips that night. The first to carry her. The second to retrieve more supplies from the crash site. The third because he had forgotten his flashlight and needed to go back for it. By the time he was finished, the sun was rising and his body felt like it belonged to someone else. He laid her on his bed and watched her breathe. Her pulse was strange, too fast and then too slow, but it was there. The glowing veins beneath her skin flickered like dying candles. For 7 days, Do-won did not sleep more than an hour at a time. He changed her bandages and dripped water into her mouth and watched her fever rise and fall like ocean waves. He did not know if what he was doing was helping. He did not know if anything could help. But he kept trying because stopping was not something he knew how to do. On the 8th day, she opened her eyes. They were the color of dying stars, purple and gold and red all mixed together. They found his face and held it with an intensity that made him forget to breathe. Her mouth moved. The sounds that came out were not words he knew, clicks and flowing tones that belonged to no human language. But then she stopped, and her eyes flickered as she tried again. "You," she said. Her voice was rough and weak. "You saved me." The words were Korean, badly pronounced but understandable. Do-won did not stop to wonder how she knew his language. That mystery could wait. "You were hurt," he said. It was not much of an explanation, but it was the truth. She studied him for a long moment. Her strange eyes moved across his face like she was reading a book written in a language she did not fully understand. "Why?" she asked. Do-won had no good answer for that. He had asked himself the same question 100 times during the long nights of watching over her. He had found an alien creature bleeding in his forest, and instead of running away or calling for help, he had brought her into his home and fought to keep her alive. "You needed help," he said finally, "and I can help." So I did. Something changed in her expression. The suspicion did not disappear, but something softer appeared beside it. Confusion, maybe. Or wonder. "Curious," she said, her voice fading as exhaustion pulled her back toward sleep. "Your kind truly is as strange as the old text claimed." Her eyes closed. Her breathing steadied. And Do-won sat beside her bed, watching over an alien queen whose name he did not yet know, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He did not call for help. He did not tell anyone what he had found. Later, he would try to explain this choice to himself. The world would tear her apart, he would think. Scientists and soldiers and politicians, all fighting over her like dogs over meat. She had been hunted and shot down and nearly killed. The last thing she needed was more people treating her like a thing to be studied. But that was only part of the truth. The deeper truth was simpler and harder to admit. For the first time in 43 days, Park Do-won did not feel alone. Winter came to the mountains like a slow-moving enemy. First the rain turned cold. Then the frost appeared on the windows each morning. Then the snow began to fall, soft at first, and then heavy and endless until the cabin was buried to its windows in white. Do-won had prepared for this. He had enough food stored, enough wood cut, enough supplies to last until spring. What he had not prepared for was sharing his isolation with an alien queen, who asked more questions than a curious child. Yura. That was her name, or at least the closest his mouth could come to pronouncing it. She said her true name had 17 syllables and required 2 tongues to speak properly. When he told her that humans only had 1 tongue, she had looked at him with such sincere pity that he almost laughed that she healed faster than anything Do-Wan had ever seen. By the 3rd week, she could stand. By the 6th, she could walk across the cabin without help. By the time the snow made travel impossible, she moved with a smooth grace that reminded him she was not human, no matter how easy it was to forget. Her body was strange and wonderful. The forearms took time to get used to, but he learned that they served different purposes. The larger upper arms were for strength and work. The smaller lower arms were for delicate tasks and expression. She used all 4 when she spoke, moving them in patterns that added meaning to her words like punctuation in a sentence. The glowing veins beneath her skin changed color with her mood. Blue when she was calm, purple when she was curious, red when she was angry, which happened whenever he asked questions she did not want to answer, but he asked anyway, because he needed to understand what had fallen into his life. Yura came from a place she called the Veil Sovereignty, an empire that ruled 17 star systems and had existed for 40,000 years. Her family, the Kethmora bloodline, had held the throne for the last 8,000 years. Queens, all of them, chosen by birth and trained from childhood to rule. She was the last. The story came out slowly, in pieces, during the long winter nights when the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. A general named Vorak had led a coup against the throne. He wanted a military state, an empire of conquest, instead of the careful balance her bloodline had maintained. Her mother had been executed first, then her sisters, one by one. Yura had escaped only because her personal guards had died fighting to give her time to reach a ship. She had run across half the galaxy, chased by assassins and hunters, until finally they had caught her at the edge of this small solar system. They had shot her ship down, and she had crashed on the nearest planet with an atmosphere that would not kill her. Earth. "I am the last of my blood," she said one night, staring into the fire with those impossible eyes. "When I die, 8,000 years of queens die with me. The Kethmora will be nothing but a memory, and Vorak will erase even that." Do-Wan did not know what to say. He understood loss, but not on this scale. His troubles seemed small beside hers, tiny and pathetic. "You're not going to die," he said. Yura turned to look at him. The firelight made her face glow orange and gold. "You say that with such certainty, Park Do-Wan. But you do not understand what hunts me. Vorak will send trackers, assassins, perhaps an entire fleet, if he learns I survived. Your world is..." She paused, searching for a word that would not offend him. "Your world is young, undefended. They will burn this planet to ash if that is what it takes to kill me." The fear her words created was cold and sharp, like a knife made of ice. But Do-Wan pushed it aside. "Then we need to make sure they do not find you," he said. It was the first time he said, "we." He did not plan it. The words simply came out, natural and true. Yura noticed. She always noticed. The winter deepened, and so did whatever strange thing was growing between them. Yura began to teach him her language, and he discovered that her people had no word for stranger. Everyone was either family, enemy, or unknown. There was no middle ground. She taught him about her culture, the complex social rules that governed everything from conversation to combat. Touch was sacred among her people. A queen did not allow casual contact, and to be touched by a queen was an honor that warriors would die for. He learned that she watched him when she thought he was not looking. He caught her eyes following him as he cooked or cleaned or fixed things around the cabin. The glow beneath her skin shifted to purple during these moments. curious and warm. One night, during a blizzard that screamed against the walls, she asked him a question that changed everything. "Bart Doan," she said, using his full name as she always did. "Why do you have no mate?" He was surprised by the question. They had talked about many things, but never about his past, his life before the mountain. "I did once," he said. "Almost?" Her name was Yunji. "What happened?" Doan stared at his hands. The memories were old, but still painful, like a wound that had healed badly. "She left me. She said I was not ambitious enough, not successful enough. She wanted someone who would fight for power and money and status. I just wanted to help animals and live a quiet life. That was not enough for her. She abandoned you because you were kind? I suppose that is one way to see it." Ira was quiet for a long moment. Then she did something that made his heart stop. She reached out with one of her smaller arms, the delicate ones meant for gentle touch, and placed her hand over his dot. Her skin was cool and smooth, like polished stone warmed by sunlight. The contact sent a shock through his body that was not unpleasant. He looked up and found her watching him with an intensity that made the air feel thick. "She was a fool," Ira said. "You are the most remarkable being I have ever met." Doan wanted to argue. He was not remarkable. He was just a man who had failed at his career, failed at his relationship, and run away to the mountains to hide from his own life. There was nothing special about him, but Ira spoke again before he could protest. "I have lived for 217 years, she said. "I have met emperors and generals and scholars. I have seen wonders that your world cannot imagine. But I have never met anyone who found a dying stranger in the forest and carried her home through the night. I have never met anyone who fought for weeks to save a life that had no value to him. Your life has value," Doan said. "To whom?" "My empire has fallen. My family is dead. I am a queen with no throne, no army, no future. By any reasonable measure, I am worthless. You are not worthless to me." The words came out before he could stop them. They hung in the air between them, honest and raw and terrifying. Ira's eyes widened. The glow beneath her skin shifted again, becoming something he had not seen before, a soft golden light that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Park Doan," she whispered. "Do you understand what you are saying?" He did not. He did not understand any of this. He did not understand why a dying alien had fallen from the sky and landed in his life. He did not understand why saving her felt like saving himself. He did not understand why her touch made his heart race and his thoughts scatter. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. "I am saying that you matter," he said. "That your life matters. And that I will do whatever I can to help you survive." Ira stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her. Not the polite expressions she wore like masks, but something genuine and warm and beautiful. "Then perhaps," she said, "there is hope after all." Outside, the blizzard continued to rage. But inside the small cabin in the mountains, something new was beginning. Something that neither of them fully understood, but both of them could feel. A human and an alien queen, alone at the edge of the world, learning to trust each other. Spring was still months away. But for the first time since her crash, Ira was looking forward to tomorrow dawn, and for the first time since he could remember, so was Doan. Spring came to the mountains slowly, like a shy animal stepping out of hiding. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. The trees began to show small green buds. The streams filled with rushing water from the higher peaks dot, and with the thaw came danger. Doan knew they could not stay hidden forever. The crater where Ira's ship had crashed was still there, a scar on the mountainside that anyone could see. Hikers would return when the weather warmed. Satellites passed overhead every day. Sooner or later, Someone would come looking for answers. But before any of that could happen, the assassin arrived. Do-hwan was at the stream that morning, filling containers with fresh water. The air was cold, but the sun was warm, and he was thinking about the vegetables he would plant once the ground thawed completely. Simple thoughts. Safe thoughts. Then he heard Yura scream. The sound cut through the peaceful morning like a blade. It was not a scream of surprise or fear. It was a scream of pain. Do-hwan dropped the containers and ran. He covered the distance to the cabin in what felt like seconds, though it must have been longer. His legs burned and his lungs ached, but he did not slow down. He crashed through the trees and into the clearing, and saw something that made his blood turn to ice. A creature stood in the doorway of his cabin. It was Vale, like Yura, but wrong. Where she was beautiful and graceful, this thing was harsh and angular. Its body was covered in plates of natural armor, and blades grew from its forearms like weapons built into its flesh. Its eyes were flat and dead, the eyes of something that killed without thought or remorse. It held Yura by the throat with one hand. Her feet dangled above the ground. Blue blood ran from a wound on her forehead, and her forearms clawed weakly at the creature's grip. "The traitor queen," the assassin said. Its voice was like stones grinding together. "General Vorak sends his regards." Do-hwan did not think. Thinking would have stopped him. Thinking would have reminded him that he was a veterinarian, a healer, a man who had never fought anything more dangerous than an angry dog. Instead, he grabbed the axe from beside the woodpile and swung it with every bit of strength his body possessed. The blade buried itself in the assassin's spine. The creature made a sound that was not quite a scream. It was higher and wetter, filled with shock and rage and pain. It dropped Yura and spun around, reaching for Do-hwan with those terrible blade arms. But its movements were wrong now, broken by the axe lodged in its back. Do-hwan did not run. He stepped forward and pulled the axe free and swung again. This time the blade caught the assassin in the neck. The creature fell. It twitched and gurgled, and its strange purple blood pooled on the ground, mixing with the mud and the melting snow. And then it was still. Do-hwan stood over the body, breathing hard, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the axe. He had killed before. Animals when mercy required it. But never like this. Never a thinking creature. Never with violence. Never with his own hands. He dropped the axe and turned to Yura. She was on her knees, gasping for breath, staring at him with those dying star eyes wide with shock. "You killed it," she whispered. "A veil hunter. You killed a veil hunter with a woodcutting tool." Do-hwan knelt beside her and checked her wounds. The cut on her forehead was bleeding but not deep. The bruises on her throat would heal. She would survive. "He was hurting you," Do-hwan said. It seemed like enough of an explanation. Perhaps it was. That night, after they had dragged the assassin's body into the forest and covered the blood with fresh earth, Yura did something strange. She asked Do-hwan to sit with her by the fire, and she brought out a small knife that she kept hidden in her belongings. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Something I should have done weeks ago," she said. "Something I was too afraid to do because I did not know if you would accept it." She cut her palm. The blue blood welled up, bright and glowing. Then she took his hand and cut his palm too, before he could protest, and pressed their wounds together. The moment their blood touched, something happened that Do-hwan could not explain. A warmth spread up his arm and into his chest, like drinking hot tea on a cold day. He heard sounds that were not sounds, words in a language he did not know, spoken by a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Yura was speaking, her voice low and rhythmic, her eyes closed in concentration. The words she used were ancient and strange, and they made the air hum with energy he could feel against his skin. When she finished, there was a mark on his wrist. A spiral of bioluminescent blue, exactly like the glowing veins beneath her skin. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, which he could somehow feel now as clearly as his own. "What did you do?" he asked. Yira opened her eyes. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by something that looked like peace. "I claimed you," she said. "By the old laws, the laws that existed before Varak and his generals, before the wars and the politics and the betrayals. You are now my consort, my protector, my chosen." Dowan stared at the mark on his wrist. It was beautiful in a strange way, but he did not understand what it meant. "I am just a veterinarian," he said. Yira smiled, and for the first time, the smile reached her eyes completely. "You are the man who saved a queen and killed her enemy with a woodcutting tool. You are exactly what I need." She explained what the claiming meant. In her culture, a queen chose one consort in her lifetime, one partner who would stand beside her through everything. The bond was sacred and unbreakable. It connected them in ways that went beyond simple love or loyalty. Through the mark, they would always be able to feel each other's presence. She would know if he was hurt or afraid or in danger, and he would know the same about her. Their lives were linked now, two threads woven into a single rope. "When I rebuild my empire," Yira said, and there was iron in her voice now, certainty that had not been there before, "you will stand beside me, not as a servant or a pet or a curiosity, as my equal, as my partner. You plan to take back your throne?" "I plan to do more than that." Her eyes were burning with something fierce and determined. "I plan to make Varak pay for what he did to my family, and I plan to build something better than what came before." Dohan looked at the mark on his wrist, then at the alien queen sitting beside him. A few months ago, he had been a broken man hiding from the world in his grandfather's cabin. Now he was bound to a queen from the stars, marked by her blood, chosen as her partner in a war that spanned galaxies. It should have terrified him. It should have sent him running into the night, screaming about how this was all too much, too strange, too impossible. Instead, he felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. "What do we do first?" he asked. Yira's smile widened. "First, we repair my ship's communication system. There are others loyal to my bloodline, scattered across the 17 systems, waiting for a signal that their queen still lives. If I can reach them, I can build a resistance. And then we go to war." Dohan nodded slowly. He was a healer, not a fighter. He knew nothing about starships or alien empires or galactic rebellions, but he had killed a Veil hunter with a wood axe. He had saved a dying queen with veterinary supplies. He had done impossible things already. Perhaps he could do a few more. "All right," he said. "Let us get to work." Outside, the spring night was cold and clear. The stars burned overhead, countless points of light in the darkness. Somewhere out there, an empire waited for its queen, and beside her, marked by her blood and bound by her choice, stood a human who had stumbled into a destiny he never asked for, but perhaps that was the way the best destinies worked. Not chosen, found. The second assassin came in summer, when the trees were thick with green leaves and the mountain streams ran warm and slow. This one was faster than the first, sleeker and more deadly. Designed specifically for hunting in forested terrain, Dohan killed it with a hunting rifle and a trap he had designed after studying the first assassin's body. The third assassin came in autumn, when the leaves turned gold and red and the air grew sharp with coming cold. This one came in a small ship, confident and arrogant, believing that no primitive world could threaten a trained Veil warrior. Dohan had spent the summer modifying Veil weapons to work with human hands. He killed the third assassin with its own technology. Word began to spread through channels that Dohan could not see or understand. Messages traveled across light years, passed between old loyalists and hidden sympathizers, carried by smugglers and traders and soldiers who still remembered the Kethmora queens. The queen lives. She hides on a primitive world at the galaxy's edge, and she is protected by a creature that has killed 3 of Varroc's elite hunters. Impossible, they said. Unprecedented. A species that barely had flight technology, defeating trained Veil assassins. Interesting, they said. The first resistance ship arrived on a cold November night, 1 year after Yira had crashed in the mountains. It appeared in the sky without warning, cloaked and silent, and landed in the clearing where the original crater had long since been covered with new growth. Its captain was Blues, a Veil veteran named Theron. He was old, even by Veil standards, his skin scarred and faded from centuries of war. He had served Yira's mother for 200 years, and his loyalty to the Kethmora bloodline was absolute. He looked at Dowan with open contempt. "This is your consort, my queen?" Theron said. His voice dripped with disbelief. "This soft, short-lived thing? This creature from a world that has not even left its own moon?" Yira's eyes flashed with dangerous light. Dowan had learned to recognize that look. It meant someone was about to regret their words. "This soft, short-lived thing has killed more of Vorac's assassins than your entire crew, Captain," she said. Her voice was cold and sharp, the voice of a queen giving commands that would not be questioned. "You will show him the respect his station demands." Theron's contempt wavered. He looked at Dowan with new eyes, seeing the scars on his hand from fighting, the weapon modifications he had designed, the confidence in his posture that had not been there a year ago. "How?" the captain asked. "How did a human kill Veil hunters?" So Dowan showed him. He showed them the traps he had built, simple but clever, using the environment against creatures who were used to fighting on starships and space stations. He showed them the weapon modifications, the changes he had made to make Veil technology compatible with human reflexes and human hands. He showed them the hunting techniques he had developed, using humanity's greatest strengths: patience, adaptability, and the ability to plan for the long game. And slowly, the Veil soldiers who had come to rescue their queen began to understand something their ancient texts had warned them about. Humans were not powerful. Their bodies were weak, and their lives were short. They had no natural armor, no built-in weapons, no ability to survive in hostile environments without extensive technology. But they were survivors. They had clawed their way from caves to cities in a cosmic heartbeat, barely 10,000 years. They had faced extinction countless times and refused to die. They learned, they adapted, they improvised. They turned their weaknesses into strengths and their enemies into tools, and they formed bonds. Not just with each other, but with anything. Dogs, cats, horses, plants, machines, even alien queens who crashed in their mountains and needed someone to save them. "Your text warned you about Earth?" Dohan asked one night, sitting with Theron over a meal that combined human and Veil foods. The old captain nodded slowly. "The ancient records speak of this world. They say it was placed under quarantine thousands of years ago, forbidden for contact. The reasons were lost to time, but the warnings remained. And now you know why?" Theron looked at him with something that might have been respect, or might have been fear. "I am beginning to understand," he said. More ships came over the following months. More soldiers. More loyalists who had hidden in the shadows of Vorac's empire, waiting for a sign that their queen still lived. Yira led them with a certainty that surprised even herself. The broken refugee Doan had pulled from the wreckage was gone, replaced by a queen who remembered who she was and what she was meant to do. And at her side, always, stood her human consort. Doan learned to fight properly now, trained by warriors who had spent centuries perfecting their skills. He was never going to be as strong as a Veil, never as fast, never as durable. But he made up for it with creativity and determination and a stubborn refusal to accept limitations. He learned to lead, too. The resistance needed commanders, and somehow Do-hwan found himself organizing missions and planning operations. The Veil soldiers who had once looked at him with contempt began to seek his advice. How do you do it? One of them asked him after a successful raid on a supply depot. How do you think of things we never consider? Do-hwan shrugged. I look at problems differently than you do. You see obstacles. I see opportunities. That makes no sense. I know. That is why it works. He became known among the resistance as the Queen's Beast. It was meant as a joke at first, a mocking name for the strange creature who had attached himself to Yura. But the name changed meaning over time. A beast was something fierce, something wild, something that could not be controlled or predicted or defeated by conventional means. The name became a title, and the title became a legend. One night, as they lay together in the small cabin that had started everything, Yura traced the mark on his wrist with her fingers. They call you the Queen's Beast, she said. There was amusement in her voice, but also pride. I have heard. Does it bother you? Do-hwan considered the question. A year ago, the name would have seemed ridiculous. He was a veterinarian, a healer, a man who had run away from his own life because he could not face his failures. Now he was something else. Something new. No, he said. I think I like it. Yura smiled and pulled him closer with all four arms. I love you, Park Do-hwan. He had never said the words back, not explicitly. They felt too large, too important, too easy to misuse. But he felt them constantly, a warmth in his chest that never faded, a certainty that he had found his place in the universe. I know, he said. I love you too. Then let us finish what we started. Let us take back my empire and build something better than what came before. Do-hwan nodded. The war was coming. Vorak was growing concerned about the resistance, sending more forces to hunt them, tightening his grip on the 17 systems. Soon there would be a final battle, a confrontation that would decide everything. But that was tomorrow's problem, tonight. The Queen's Beast held his queen in his arms and watched the stars through the window of a small cabin in the mountains of Earth. Tomorrow they would plan and fight and possibly die. Tonight, they were simply two beings who had found each other against impossible odds. And that was enough. The universe was vast and cold and full of creatures who wanted them dead. But they had each other. And with that foundation, they would shake the stars. The final battle came 2 years after Yura crashed in the mountains of Earth. 2 years of building, planning, fighting, and bleeding for a throne that seemed impossibly distant. 2 years of watching friends die and enemies fall, and the resistance grow from a handful of ships to a fleet that could challenge an empire. General Vorak had grown careless. His military state was efficient but brittle, held together by fear rather than loyalty. The soldiers followed him because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not. The governors obeyed because their families were held hostage. The citizens stayed silent because speaking was death. Fear could build an empire. But fear could not hold one together when the pressure became too great. And Yura brought pressure. She struck at supply lines and communication networks. She freed prisoners and recruited defectors. She reminded the 17 systems that the Kethmora bloodline still existed, still fought, still believed in something better than Vorak's endless war. One by one, planets began to turn. Not openly, not yet, but quietly. Messages of support arrived in secret. Ships disappeared from Vorak's navy and appeared in Yura's fleet. Soldiers who had once hunted the queen now knelt before her and offered their blades. When the time came for the final assault, Yura commanded a fleet of 300 ships. Not enough to defeat Vorak's forces in open battle, but enough to strike at the heart of his power while his attention was elsewhere. The capital world of the Vale sovereignty was called Kethros. It was an ancient place, built by the first queens 10,000 years ago, covered in towers of black stone that reached toward the sky like grasping fingers. The palace at its center had been the home of Yura's bloodline for 8,000 years. Now it was Vorak's stronghold. The assault began at dawn. Yura's fleet dropped from hyperspace in a formation that caught the defense forces by surprise, scattering them before they could organize. Landing ships descended through the chaos, carrying soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. Dohwan led one of those landing parties. He had tried to stay behind, to coordinate from safety, but Yura had refused. "My consort does not hide while others fight for our cause," she said. "You stand beside me, or I stand alone." So he stood beside her, as he always had. As he always would. The fighting on the ground was brutal and bloody. Vorak's elite guards were the best warriors in the Empire, trained from birth to kill without mercy or hesitation. But the resistance fighters had something the guards did not, a reason to win beyond fear of punishment. They fought for their queen. They fought for freedom. They fought for a future where their children would not live under the boot of a dictator who saw them as tools to be used and discarded. And at their head, fighting with a ferocity that shocked even her own soldiers, was Yura of the Keth-Mora. She moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, her forearms wielding weapons with deadly precision, her voice calling out commands that turned chaos into order. The glow beneath her skin burned bright red, the color of battle rage, and her enemies fell before her like wheat before a scythe. Beside her, always beside her, was Dohwan. He was not the strongest fighter, not the fastest, not the most skilled, but he was always where he needed to be, covering Yura's blind spots, protecting her flanks, doing the small crucial things that kept her alive. They reached the palace gates as the sun reached its peak. The resistance fighters planted charges and blew the ancient doors apart. And then they poured into the corridors where Yura had played as a child. Before everything was taken from her, Vorak waited for them in the throne room. He was massive. Even for a Vale, his body was covered in thick armor plates, grown from his own flesh over centuries of war. Scars covered every visible surface, marks of battles won and enemies destroyed. His eyes were cold and empty, the eyes of someone who had killed so many times that death meant nothing to him. Behind him stood his elite guard, a dozen warriors who had never known defeat. Yura stopped in the doorway. Dohwan stood at her shoulder, his weapon raised and ready. "You think you can reclaim what I have taken, little queen?" Vorak's voice was like grinding metal. With this pathetic band of loyalists and one alien pet, Yura stepped forward. She did not look small against him, though she was. She looked like a queen, proud and unafraid. "I do not think, General," she said. "I know, because you made a mistake that has defined your entire rule." "And what mistake was that?" Yura gestured to the soldiers behind her, Vale and human alike standing together. "You forgot why the Keth-Mora ruled for 8,000 years, she said. "It was never about power. It was about connection, about inspiring loyalty instead of demanding it. My consort understood this from the moment he found me bleeding in his mountains." "You never will." Vorak laughed. It was a harsh sound, like rocks falling. "Loyalty is weakness," he said. "Power is all that matters. And I have more power than you will ever know." He moved. Fast, so fast that Dohwan barely saw him coming. His blade arm swept toward Yura in a killing stroke that should have ended everything. But Dohwan was there. He did not think. He simply acted, throwing himself between Vorak and Yura, bringing up his weapon to block the blow. The impact sent him flying across the room, crashing into a pillar with enough force to crack the stone. Pain exploded through his body. He tried to stand, but his legs would not work. Something was broken, maybe several things, but he had given Yura the moment she needed. She struck while Varric was still turning, her blade finding the gap in his armor where his neck met his shoulder. Blue blood sprayed across the throne room floor. Varric stumbled, shocked that anyone had managed to wound him. And then the resistance soldiers were there, overwhelming the elite guards, surrounding the wounded general, bringing him to his knees. Varric looked up at Yura with something that might have been surprise, or respect, or simply disbelief. "A human," he said, blood bubbling from his mouth. "I am killed because a human gave you one moment. The shame of it." Dowan had managed to drag himself upright against the pillar. His vision was blurred and his body screamed with pain, but he could still see. "There is no shame in losing to someone who fights for something real," he said. His voice was weak but steady. "You just never understood that." Yura stood over the general who had murdered her family, destroyed her empire, and hunted her across the galaxy. She raised her blade one final time. "For my mother," she said. "For my sisters. For everyone you killed to build your throne of fear." The blade fell, and Varric, the butcher, the usurper, the monster, was finally dead. The coronation happened 3 months later, after the last of Varric's loyalists had been captured or scattered, after the 17 systems had sworn allegiance to their new queen, after the wounds had healed and the dead had been mourned. Yura stood on the balcony of the palace where she had been born, looking out at a crowd of millions who had gathered to see their queen restored. She wore the crown of the Kethmora, the same crown her mother had worn, and her grandmother before her, but she was not alone. Beside her, in armor marked with the spiral of royal bonding, stood Park Dowan, the first human consort in Vale history. The veterinarian who had saved a dying alien and changed the galaxy. The crowd's roar was like thunder. After the ceremony, as night fell and the celebrations continued below, Yura and Dowan stood together on the balcony. "Any regrets?" Yura asked. Dowan looked out at the alien stars, the impossible city, the future that stretched before them like an unmarked path. "Only one," he said. "I should have asked for your name before I carried you through the snow. Would have made the trip easier." Yura laughed. It was a sound he loved more than anything in the universe. "I love you, Park Dowan." "I know," he said. "I love you too." Somewhere, in the records of 1,000 worlds, humanity's name was being written in a new way. Not as primitives, not as curiosities, but as a species capable of standing beside queens and toppling empires. All because one man had looked at a dying stranger and seen someone who needed help. That was the secret that Varric never understood. The secret that made humans dangerous. They did not fight for power or glory or conquest. They fought for connection, for love, for the simple belief that every life had value. Even the lives of wounded aliens who fell from the sky. And that made them unstoppable. The queen and her beast stood together, looking at the stars they would rule, and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, new battles to fight. But tonight, they had one, and that was enough.